Down in front.
I think we have a prop for a character with a different body plan here. We have one. I mean, there's a tail to worry about there.
What my cat was doing the last panel I was on. She did not want to stay off camera.
Well, I mean, do we really mind the cat showing up?
No.
Away we go.
Okay, I see we have some people here. Welcome to Farpoint Convention and welcome to the panel on writing characters with different body plans, which is a panel I suggested, and we're going to talk about remembering that your Andorian character has antennae, which is actually what triggered this, writing dragons and all of their various different body parts. And I have two amazing panelists here. If Danielle and Heather would please introduce yourselves and tell the audience why you are on this panel.
I'm Danielle Ackley-McPhail. I'm an author, editor, publisher of eSpec books, and I write across a lot of different genres, including alternate body types and technology that also comes with the same considerations.
Okay, Heather?
I'm Heather E. Hutsell. I write fiction and fantasy, and I'm on this panel because writing with different body plans is actually something fairly new for me, and it's something of great interest to me for future works.
Okay, and I am Jennifer R. Povey. I write everything from epic fantasy to stories for analog. And as I say, I suggested this panel. I've been working hard on this recently and I want to get better at this. So let's start by saying, let's start with an example of a writer you think does this really well, or a work where you think somebody has done this really well.
You're really asking a lot. I read so much, it's hard to remember titles and names.
I know how you feel. I do know how you feel.
I actually, it's not going to help anybody, but I'm actually editing a collection right now by Jeff Young. And it's a science fiction collection, and he is phenomenal at envisioning alien body types and cultures and the different ways that they might move and such. So that's coming up later this year. If anybody wants to make a note of it, it's called Written in Light. And we are predisposed towards the way that we are used to moving, and to see how he envisions things that are just totally, completely, utterly alien. He doesn't follow the Star Trek rules of having to, be recognizably humanoid.
Well, that's budget. That's because they couldn't afford to do anything else.
Yeah.
Heather?
Well, like I said, this is something that's fairly new for me, so I don't have a whole lot to go on as far as things that I've read. I will say the only thing that comes to mind at the moment was the novelization of The Shape of Water. And I don't know if you're familiar with the film, but the amphibian man is described somewhat more anatomically in the book than we get to see in the film.
Yeah. Ah, yes, the fish man.
Yeah.
And my example, what I'm going to pull up is Werner Vinge is one of the masters of writing aliens, really good aliens. And I'm thinking primarily of A Fire Upon the Deep and the Times, where he creates a race of aliens that have multiple bodies.
Ooh.
They're multiple, each body's kind of dog-like. but they have like 4 or 5 of them. So all of their manipulation is done by coordinating these different bodies. And then they bump into humans and get very confused. Very confused. And one of the things he does really well is describe what a human looks like to something like that. So with that in mind, what's the biggest problem you think that you see when people try to write a different body plan? What do you think is the biggest issue people have?
I think the biggest problem is continuity, because we don't even think about how we would move. And so when we get into the writing of the aliens, we might come up with these different concepts of how they look and how their mobility and their manipulation of things may be different. But if we're not paying attention, if we're not focused on those differences when we're writing a passage, we fall back on what our default is. And it conflicts with what we've established for those alternate body types.
Heather?
I think wanting to fall back on human qualities too much, like this alien is exactly like a human being except it's green, you know, and not being, I guess, adventurous enough to branch out and really get into the nitty gritty. Like I came up with a character that's of a different species, different planet, and the males are the ones that carry and birth the offspring.
Right, let's see horses.
Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? You know, you can't be afraid to get into that and explore that. And it's tricky.
And I will say that the biggest problem I see is a very simple one is, when I was talking at the start, I've known so many Star Trek fanfic writers write Andorians and forget the antennae. For scene after scene, they just completely forget that their character has antennae and their character is doing things with, or they forget their cat person's tail. So that's another issue, is if you've got extra body parts, tails, wings, and I'm bad at it too. I've done it myself. You've got to remember that they're there. And one tip I would give is put a picture or a sketch of the character somewhere where you can see it when you're writing it. Danielle, what's your tip for doing a better job?
Understand the physics of what an alternate body type, what challenges that would be, and how it would move and interact. And how, like, if you're writing science fiction and you're in a different type of environment, what would cause that evolution and what purpose does that evolve to address? Because all of the different variations that we see, they happen to a purpose. Very few things, you know, they may no longer have that purpose, but they came about for a specific reason. And utilizing that so that it isn't just a person in a cat suit or whatever. That's what you really want to do, because you don't want to put that much effort into something and have it just be window dressing. Anytime you create something new, whether it be a world or a race or something like that, the point of introducing that is to be creative and explore different potentials. And if you don't utilize them, then, you know, you could just swap out a human and it wouldn't make any difference to the story. In which case, why?
And this reminds me a lot of costuming. I've done a lot of that too.
Yeah.
And textiles. Like if you want a creature to be sleek and silky and quiet, then you can't describe it as, you know, being crisp and scaly and full of plates, or, you know, you have to be thinking of what they're going to sound like when they move, and you know, what they smell like, and what their texture is like, their coloring. It's much more complex than I think a lot of people imagine it to be.
I think a good example of that is A Wrinkle in Time. The I can't again, I don't hold on to names and stuff. There's too much up there. But the after Meg goes through is affected by going through the Tesseract, and the auntie, which she calls her, that's a very alien character, and she does bring in aspects of the smell and everything, because even though these are different creatures that are alien to us, we're still going to filter them through our sensual feedback.
No matter how alien we make the aliens, they're still going to be human, because there's only so far you can go. So here's an interesting question. You're talking about making sure that all the body parts serve a purpose. So, you know, even if your character has wings, do they fly? Or are the wings vestigial?
Mm-hmm.
And what difference does that make? So some thoughts on how to come up with the right sort of body plan to match the story you need is challenging. And I suspect some people start the other way, that they come up with a cool alien and then go, okay, what can I do with this? But how do you put together a body plan that serves, how does the body plan affect the story you're telling? Mm-hmm. Let's go deep here. Let's go deep.
I haven't done a lot with alien body types, but I have done science fiction where a human consciousness finds itself in another form. So in So It Begins, I have a character who is on the verge of death, and they want to imprint her knowledge, not her personality or anything, her knowledge and experience into a military pack bot, a bomb disposal robot and detection robot, for lack of better.
Right.
And so what she expects to be able to do, filtered through the limitations of that robot, and exploring how to manipulate things and how to change things, because obviously, of course, things go wrong and her personality does come along for the ride.
Of course it does.
And it was very challenging, one, to determine what the capabilities of that robot is. I actually went to iRobot's website and downloaded their advertising packet. So I get the terminology right, and I knew what capabilities there were and how the robot moved, and integrated that into how her new reality was, how she could function and what she needed to do.
Heather?
I'm not sure what to add there. I think, Danielle, you mentioned restrictions, and it got me thinking about, you know, well, that train left the station. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah, go ahead, go on. It'll come back.
If it comes back, just speak up. I understand all about the train of thought, not just getting well, but going straight off the cliff into the ocean. We have all been there. And so let's follow up a little bit, because Danielle's talking about transferred consciousness and changing a character's body type. And that in some ways kind of makes it easier because you can have the character has to think about those body parts first. When you're writing a dragon knows that they're supposed to have talons, wings, and a tail. You know, I mean, that's part of being a dragon. I mean, unless they're a Dragonlance dragon and like to wander around in human form half the time so that they can fit into small spaces. But I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you get in the absence of having a nice guide of the uploaded human consciousness, how do you get the reader to feel that there's a different body plan there?
I think part of it ends up being the conflict between characters because of expectations. We expect to move and react in certain ways, and that those around us also do. A good example is if two people are walking through the woods, they're roughly the same size, they all have the same appendages. If you move a branch so that someone can go by or so that you can go by, the other person will be able to catch it. But what if you have someone following you that doesn't have the same appendages, maybe is taller or something like that, then the environment impacts them differently. And if you're not conscious of that, that causes the conflict, which brings those differences to light and emphasizes them.
Heather?
I haven't written anything where something biologically is different, but there have been technologically, what's the term for it? Biotechnical things that have been altered in one person, one character, to make them different from another who's just straight human. And the person who's been altered having to adapt to that psychologically, emotionally, physically, and those around him having to also adjust because they're not used to what he's now capable of.
I think cybernetics was the word you were looking for.
Yes. It's set in, steampunk setting, so.
Oh, steampunk.
But yes, but yes.
Oh, steampunk.
Yeah. But that can raise all kinds of conflicts and trauma, I think, to the story.
Well, I mean, I'm something of a CJ Cherry fan, and she writes about interactions between humans and a very alien society. And one of the issues is that, although they're humanoid, they're a lot bigger. So bigger, which causes problems for the human MC when he wants to sit down. Because the chairs are all designed for people who are 7 feet tall. So that's another thing you need to think about with different body types. How do you design furniture and equipment that's being used by, say, somebody with tentacles instead of hands? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on good ways to address that issue? Do they have furniture?
Yeah, it's challenging because so much of design is specific to body types. So like a chair that we use, someone with wings would have a problem with. And if you go into a literary setting and can adapt to that, it would be things like having backs of the chairs that can be removed or folded down, or just where those elements are not present or can be dropped down into the body of the furniture. Little things like that. Or in the case of the rather large individuals and the human-sized individuals, having a step stool or a type of like ladder configuration that they can use to get up into it. But then you have the psychological issues of feeling like a 3-year-old in a room of adults when you're all adults.
Right.
And that series actually does go into that, because sometimes he's actually sitting on a kid's chair. And, you know, but they actually does go into, if you were surrounded by people who are that much bigger than you, you're going to feel small, and you have to get used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to get them to treat you as an equal. Heather?
I have one of my novels has 5 different species of beings, and they're all humanoid except for one, which is basically like talking animals. But 2 of them, the most contrasted ones, are drugans that are a minimum of 7 feet tall and taller, and the melicites, who are a maximum of 5 feet tall and shorter. And there's an interaction between a melicite and a drugan that involves clothing, of giving some, you know, from one to the other. And I had to remember that I had to describe, you know, she can't just put this person's shirt on and expect it to fit her like a shirt. It fits her like a
Could be a
down
dress.
with a train, right?
Yeah.
So interactions between their daily little things, not just furniture, but if he were to hand her a cup, it would be, you know, like a gallon tankard versus a thimble that she would hand to him, and it would be normal to her. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes just as much of an important difference as,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, size is fairly simple, but it is something that if you're interacting between species, if the size isn't compatible,
Mm-hmm.
you can have fun things happen, like people hitting their heads on the ceiling.
Right. Or if, you know, you have a creature that can speak to humans, but it's in the shape of a snake, you can't hand it a mug with a handle on it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess you could, but
I am now envisioning a snake bringing its tail around and sipping from a cup, and it's got the tail hooked through the handle.
yeah.
Yep.
But then, of course, if you're thinking about something that just looks like a snake, what is that snake using to manipulate objects anyway?
Right.
So that gives me a good idea for a question. I know we also have some in the QAA, which I will get to, and I apologize for the ghost that just appeared in my background. What are the limitations on a not so much as a sentient being, because certainly in fantasy, I'm thinking of the sentient horses in Valdemar. Certainly in fantasy, you can have a sentient species that is very much not technological. But what kind of limitations are there on the body plan you can use for a species that's actually like us, tool using, scientific method, etc.? What can you not do?
I think that you have to balance the desire to create something truly unusual with how it's going to interact with the story that you want to tell. If you are specifically designing something, whether it be alien or a society or whatever, the differences that you create need to interact with the story and the plot itself. Otherwise, it's a distraction, and it's too easy to forget elements that would come into play because they're not integral.
Right, right.
So you have to rein yourself back.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve your purpose if you have 2 groups that need to work together, if their physiologies are incompatible, but you don't actually make that part of the story.
Heather? Uh-oh.
I think environment is what? Did I freeze?
You're
Yeah.
right. Yes, you did momentarily. That's why I uh-oh'd. Little worried
Sorry.
I lost you there.
You're good.
It is. It's unstable, so.
It's fine.
I think environment is also something that really to be remembered and carefully paid attention to, because if you creature or another being on a planet that's not Earth and you're describing the sun, would they call it the sun or would they call it something else? Like how much of our human world are you going to put into this alien's world? I mean, if that makes sense. Like if you're trying to describe what a lawn looks like, do you use grass? Do they have grass? Do they call it something else?
Okay, I'm not sure why we suddenly have. Okay, I think I will take some of these audience questions because they're really good. So from Maurice, how do you build a civilization around a non-humanoid race? What tasks become essential? Who does those tasks and how? I think that's back to our tools and environment issue. Maybe Heather can go first because she's got her seahorse people.
Let me see. Let me look at the question here. I think you have to decide what's important to this race. When it comes to the one I mentioned where the men carry the babies, having offspring is important to them, but it's not as important as it is to humans for them to continue because they have so many at a time, or they can have so many at a time. In this particular case with this one story, it's a miscarriage, and there's a conflict in the character because he's mourning the loss, but at the same time, he knows that there's really no point in it. If that makes sense. It's not really a task, but it's an aspect of that creature's existence.
I mean, I created a race for a campaign that are oviparous. Suddenly incubators for eggs become very important to your society at that point. Danielle?
The challenge is to separate social conventions from biological ones. So like Heather was saying, if you have like hundreds of babies at one time, and you know that you'll be able to have hundreds of babies again, losing 100 doesn't have as much of an impact. But if it is something that is socially motivated, culturally motivated, that is a harder thing for us to also perceive, because cultures, even on Earth, develop radically differently from each other. And we're always going to put things through our own experience. So we're not going to understand why they have specific ceremonies. And we're not going to be able to avoid the cultural taboos because to us, it's no big deal. So if we're all upset because he lost these 100 babies, but to them, it's not a big deal, then we are putting on them our perception, and it's coloring our interaction with that race. And then our reaction to what they see as, unfortunate but not a big deal, causes all kinds of tensions and problems.
And all kinds of stories.
Yes.
Okay. Here's one from Cherry Rosen. do you get annoyed if fan art or even cover art doesn't match the vision you created in the book? Has this personally happened to any of you? What did you do or feel? It has not happened to me, although I have certainly seen cover art and then read the book and wondered what the author felt.
Yeah. I haven't encountered fan art, but I like to introduce illustrations into books when I'm able. And often my perception does not match with the artist's perception. Usually I don't make an issue of it because art is subjective. As long as it's good art, it doesn't matter if it matches what was in my head. Generally, it at least basically follows, like if they have blonde hair, then the illustration has blonde hair. It's just the features that they have interpreted differently. I try not to change things like that unless they're drastically off, because introducing too much restriction on the artist can affect the final outcome. But every author has to accept the fact, whether it's fan art or just a reader interpreting a story, we're only creating half of the story. The rest of it comes from the person that's reading it. And if that's what the story was to them, just be honored that they decided to do fan art.
I haven't had that experience. I haven't had any experience with fan art of my work. As far as cover art or illustrations, I work very closely with my illustrators, and they're always very good at giving me exactly what I ask for. There was one illustration I got that was like not even remotely close to what I asked for, but the characters were still fine. Like that wasn't affected at all. So that wasn't a big deal. And now I am really curious to see some fan art of my work. So I hope someone will get on that.
I would love to see. I have only had fan art of one thing, which is of one of my Tumblr posts is always coming back to me with a different piece of fan art added to it, and it's absolutely wonderful. And none of them match my vision, but that's kind of the point. Okay, I have another question here from Cherry. With CGI special effects, do you feel more optimistic that non-humanoid characters in books can be adapted to screen?
We've certainly already even seen this now. And, live action and CG and animation, all of it, the strides that they have made in the processes produce some really convincing effects. And so I don't think that you're going to see the same restrictions. In fact, so many people mock the original restrictions on what you could and couldn't do, like Star Trek. So there's definitely individuals out there that have gone out of their way to break out of those molds and to introduce the other in very sharp contrast.
Heather?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's all up from here. I mean, the things that can be done in films now and television, it's such a jump from even 10 years ago.
I mean, I personally would argue that in some cases, puppetry still works better than CGI. There's a reason Baby Yoda is still actually a puppet, and Disney had the money. What CGI allows is for us to do non-humanoid characters and begin to move that way in television because it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. And that's the big difference, that CGI is bringing down these things into a much more budget-friendly range for production companies to use. So yeah, I mean, I do think so. I do think there's still a little bit of a limit in that readers tend to be better able to adapt to understanding that this character is a completely different shape from people who consume most of their speculative fiction visually. I am not, just because when you're reading, you have to create the character from whole cloth anyway. When you're on a television screen, that you're being shown what you get. So you don't have to make that translation. And, you know, when I watch things versus reading them, it's a little different. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. If not, I can come up with some more. But we do have another one from Cherry. It almost seems like you were talking about, when we're talking about tools and stuff, the struggle the ADA has in adapting our world to the variety of disabilities out there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think aliens on Earth would need to sue for adaptation equipments and modifications? There's an entire panel there.
Well, we saw part of this in Alien Nation, where they had to integrate with society, and there were elements that did not fit with what was already established in society. But you're always going to have those that want to capitalize on that new market. So society is going to adapt. I don't think they will have to sue. It doesn't mean that it is going to be easily and readily available for them, but whatever need they have, somebody's going to go to meet it, because that's how they're going to capitalize. Whether or not they'll do it well.
Heather?
Alien Nation's the only one I can think of where aliens are here that I've seen. The next closest thing to it that I can think of is Grimm. I just started watching that recently.
Oh.
And I mean, the Vesson have been around as long as humans have, and they've integrated as well as they can. They try and stay hidden, so there's no asking for humans to help make it easier for them.
And most of them are of a body type that is humanoid. So they have different capabilities, not necessarily different needs. The other one I can think of is V. But in that situation, for the most part, they kept themselves isolated intentionally.
What is going on in the background? Why am I hearing?
I don't know. There's nothing in the background on my end.
I'm the only one here.
It's haunted.
Well, I just checked my gather town, and it certainly seems to be. Okay, that seems to have solved that little problem. I'm not sure why. It was gather town, but I'm not sure why, because I thought I had it all done properly. And apparently I didn't. My apologies. That was no, it was me. It was me. I apologize for that. Heather, could you repeat the last thing you said?
I think Danielle was talking about how most of the Vesson already had humanoid figures, so there was really no need for humans to help them adapt.
And then we spoke about V, where they had alien physiologies, but intentionally were appearing human. So they kept themselves isolated for the most part. And the differences came out to produce the conflict in the story, such as how they ate and what they actually look like, and when they engineered the mating.
I mean, I would actually argue in a slightly different angle that if we make that sort of contact with aliens, presumably at that point we're getting on with them, and being as we are human, that means we're getting something from them, and vice versa. I would actually argue that the curb cut effect might actually result in things designed for aliens actually helping disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing to bear in mind is if that's the case, then any human on their world is probably going to be needing adaptive technology too. And again, it could be as simple as, I always love to envision the diplomatic meeting where they're bringing in all these different kinds of chairs. Because each alien has their own kind of preferred way to sit, perch, lie, whatever. So, and they have to have these people whose job it is to make sure that everyone has the right chair.
I think the series that dealt with that the best actually is Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 dealt with it well within the normal television limitations.
Mm-hmm. But the special sectors and the breathers for those that needed to enter those sectors, that it wasn't their atmosphere, and the different cultural aspects and physiologies that they explored. Londo. I will never forget the card playing scene. I thought it was brilliant when he's cheating with his tentacle and somebody puts down a cold pitcher on top of it, and how his body reacted to that.
Especially after you find out what he was actually using. What the tentacles actually are.
Yeah. And I thought it was brilliant how they brought in the statuary, which to us, we would just think that it's artistic, and it's actually, physiologically accurate.
Right, and then he has to explain that. And he's like, oh yeah, that's, oh. And they got away with that too, which kind of surprises me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see any more questions. So let me see. Yeah, what have we not covered? So let's go back a little bit to, at the start we were talking about kind of the basics of remembering what parts you have and making those parts integrate together. How do you handle physical interactions between characters with different body types?
Well, there would be different reactions for one thing. We're used to like waving when we say hello, or like rolling our eyes if we think somebody is, full of shit or something like that. And other body types would have different kinds of reactions. And that's how we would be able to establish for the reader, for a viewer, exactly how different these beings are. And so we have to think about how to convey that this is a similar reaction to something that we would do.
And then, of course, you've got the conflict of you roll your eyes and that turns out to be incredibly rude to the person you're talking to. Like fighting words rude. Heather?
Yeah, I imagine it would be pretty odd if an alien species came here and the only way that they could understand us was to put their hand, paw, tentacle, what have you on our throat. That could really trigger a lot of negative reactions from some humans, but it could be the only way.
I mean, I could actually see how that would physiologically happen if they didn't have a sense of hearing. They were feeling the vibrations in your vocal cords, and it would be very disconcerting, especially disconcerting, but in that case, there might be a technological solution to those sorts of issues too.
I imagine the first time it happened would be quite a shock.
I'm actually now envisioning that somebody does that and comes up and tries to do that to the president, and the Secret Service tackles them.
And then a war starts.
And well, not necessarily a war. Now, Sherry is asking us a couple more questions. I'm actually going to take the bottom one here, which is, have any of you actually studied anatomy and physiology of humans or animals and physically hands-on studied body structure to gain insight into building aliens? And we have 10 minutes left.
Can I answer that
Yeah.
first?
Of course.
Okay. I didn't study it specifically for creating alien bodies or otherwise, not even for my writing, but I have done 17 years of healthcare. I did anatomy and physiology for massage therapy and kinesiology. So I got to learn how muscles actually really move and work with each other and with bone structures. So I have a lot of that insight, and I do definitely think about that and apply it when I need to in my writing.
Okay.
So
Danielle?
I haven't gone for any structured learning, but I will get concepts and an idea of what I want to do, and I will specifically go and look for something scientific that substantiates that, and mine whatever article or whatever it is I find for specifics and language to lend credibility to this, projection that I am putting forth in the story.
Okay. And I will say that while I have not studied anatomy, I will say that the closest thing I think you can get on this planet to having a different body type is riding an animal, where you have to worry about you do have to worry about where all four of those hooves are, and you can't always trust the horse to do it for you.
Yeah.
But no, I have not specifically studied anything to gain insight, but I do read up on pretty much everything. Okay, do we have any more questions? Because we are approaching the end of our time here. I mean, heck, if a panelist has a question, something you want to talk about. Have you ever been annoyed or angry at a lazy author or illustrator who created something that really could never leave or move? I think we need to get Sherry on this panel next time.
As an editor, I encounter this all the time, whether I'm officially editing or not. You do have to be aware of the rules that you have set up in your universe, and when you violate them, you violate the trust and the understanding of the reader. So it definitely is a problem if you don't stay aware of what you've established and work within those parameters.
Okay, Heather?
In the context of in physiology, but definitely with textiles, there are oftentimes authors want to use certain textiles that just are not going to work in the situation they want it to. They're not going to move the way that they want it to when their character jumps off of a building. They're not going to make the right sound or not make the sound, or, it's just, you have to know what you're working with to be able to write it accurately.
Mm-hmm. Did you freeze, Jen?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm just I was just typing something in the Q&A. And by the way, if I look over that, I know I'm looking over that way a lot. That's because that's where my clock is. So I think that this point, I would like to start to wind this up. If I could have final thoughts from my panelists and where I can find you and feel free to hold a book up or talk about one of your books. Danielle?
Ultimately, when you create something, it is ultimately important that you are totally body conscious and aware of what is and is not possible with what you have created, and stay true to that so that you're not confusing your reader. I am Danielle Ackley-McPhail, publisher and author at eSpec Books, and my newest titles are The Fox's Fire, More Tips from the Handyman, and The Kindly One.
Awesome.
Also, we're running a special today, specifically this weekend for Farpoint. And in the chat, you will see a link to our online store with a Farpoint discount that's good for 1 week.
Awesome. Heather?
I have a blog and website, heatherehutsell.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I'm currently working on a book called 366 Stories, and it's a 1-page story per day for a whole year. And that should be out about this time next year. But if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you'll get little snippets of one or two stories a day from that, just little teasers.
Okay, cool. And my final thought is watch how things move, think about how things move, and think about how you move. My latest, most recent book is The Secret History of Victor Prince, which is a prequel to my urban fantasy series. It's an origin story. And I also have this book that I wrote recently, which has I have to hold it perfectly or it disappears into the background, but this book, Fire Ring, has a main character who has a set of rings that fully functional, I will note. Yeah. It's also magic. And thank you all for being here. Thank you to my panelists. You have been amazing. We've had an amazing audience. Hopefully next year we will be able to do this for real, and I will be in the virtual bar later. Thank you.
Miss you all.
Oh.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
It was just like a real convention.
It was. I thought that went really well.
Who's gonna talk?
Well, we also had the attendee who wanted to be on the panel.
That was really weird.
She just had a lot. Well, I mean, she just had a lot of questions, and I don't mind because she was the only one who had questions, so I don't mind.
No, that wasn't what I meant. The person that just suddenly appeared in the middle of the panel.
You mean the face in my background?
No, another person showed up. I'm
assuming that was one of the tech guys. I'm assuming that it was 30 minutes.
That was a tech.
He clicked on the wrong link.
No, he came in to check because someone said the captioning wasn't working right. But
okay. I thought he just clicked on the wrong Zoom link.
Nope. No, he was just checking the captioning.
Okay, that is fair.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, that was.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I apologize for my technical problem. Gathertown unmuted itself. Tomorrow, in my panel tomorrow, I will close Gathertown, so that does not happen.
It's good to see you all.
It is. It is. Now I have somebody trying to get my attention, so I will duck out, but I will be available for after panel talk. I just might be multitasking.
I have to go. Mike got his second shot and he's not so happy today.
Yeah, I've heard that the second one can do a bit of a number one.
Oh, it does. Yep. It does. Different degrees to different people, but yeah.
Go take care of him.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, folks. I'm going to close up. Thank you all.